Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yahowah. My pleasure to be with you. We're here with Kirk again this evening. And Kirk, you know, there was a period of time where if you were a doomsdayer, you were considered a bit of a conspiratorialist, you know, and you're Chicken Little, the sky is falling, and you know, you were an end times prepper. Today,
all true.
Today,
yeah.
all you have to do is read the news.
I know.
I mean,
know.
Today you'd have to be a conspiratorialist to assume that the sky isn't falling.
That's correct.
It's so upside down. We're in a period of the worst possible scenario for our economy. We have raging inflation, and inflation this time not on luxury items, but on staples, on food,
yes.
on wood, on just the gasoline, energy, electricity, the basics of life. We have and tremendous shortages of the basics of life, and that there are tremendous food shortages in addition to inflation on them, and that's going to get worse. We have tremendous water shortages because of our inability to copy the Romans 2,000 years ago and learn how to manage aqueducts and move it from where it is to where it's needed. But nonetheless, nothing makes any sense. It's not only just this raging inflation, but we're about to go into a recession. And the combination of a recession, and it could be a great recession, and runaway inflation, it doesn't get any worse than that.
No.
I mean, your currency becomes worthless as you have no opportunity to make up the difference. It's devastating where we are destroyed our currency. We've borrowed to the point we can't borrow anymore without just making a joke of everything. We've got the talking heads in their echo chambers now screaming to eliminate the weapons of war. They don't want you to have assault rifles. It's just unconscionable. It makes no sense. It's immoral to have these weapons of war, weapons of war, weapons of war. Have you ever read the U.S. Constitution?
Yes.
The only kind of weapons that the U.S. Constitution grants the right for Americans not only to own, but to have on their possession are weapons of war. That's the entire point.
Yeah, we were
that if you have a government that can determine who can and cannot have a weapon of war, you have a tyrannical government.
Dictator. Right.
Yes. So if these talking liberal morons would actually read the document, they would talk about banning weapons of war because the Constitution grants an unequivocal right to own them and bear them. And if they wish to speak against the Constitution, they have no right to speak because their office doesn't exist. Their country doesn't exist. Their elections don't mean anything. You can't have it both ways. There are lots of reasons that the world has become a very deadly place. And it's going to become far deadlier. Some of those reasons are that we grossly mismanaged COVID. The Fauci approach of shutting down industries, telling who could work and who couldn't work, the social distancing, keeping people isolated was devastating. And we talked about it not after the fact, but before the fact. This would occur. And drunkenness is up, mental disorders are up, sexual abuse is up, all forms of crime is skyrocketing. So that isolation brought to the surface mental deficiencies and mental disabilities. As a society, we have a serious problem with the psychopaths. The President of the United States is a psychopath. I don't say that callously, but for him to get on his soapbox and say that we're sending all manner of weapons, probably now up in the range of $50, $60 billion worth of America's most sophisticated weapons, He says, "Yeah, I'm not sending it to win the war against Russia. I'm not sending it to because I think it's going to stop the invasion. I'm sending it to inflict pain." It's only a psychopath who strives to inflict pain. Even if you were in the worst situation and you had a moral opportunity, maybe even responsibility to be violent, that someone you are close to that you love is being physically assaulted, their life being threatened, at that point you have absolute right to stop the perpetrator and to do so violently if necessary. Even then, your intent ought not to be to inflict pain, but to stop the inflicting of pain. So we have a psychopath as the President of the United States, and he's a complete hypocrite, saying that his great mission right now is to preclude people having weapons of war. And yet he's sending weapons of war as if there were no tomorrow to the Ukrainians to inflict pain upon the Russians.
Strange, isn't it?
There is a serious problem right now with rising hate crimes. In New York City, 40% of the hate crimes are foisted on a population that represents about 2% of America, Jews. So they are 20 times more likely to be the victim of a hate crime. So I guess it does prove that Black Lives Matter, because the hate crimes aren't being perpetrated towards blacks, they're being perpetrated towards Jews, but Jewish lives evidently don't matter. By the way, speaking of crimes on the East Coast, we are our outreach today is to Baltimore, Maryland, and the Jewish community there. So we welcome you to Yada Yahowah. Yada ought to be a word that you know. It's a Hebrew word for knowing, recognizing, being aware of. Yahweh is a word that you probably do not know because rabbis have expressly precluded Jews from knowing that name. It happens to be God's name. It's God's one and only name. And he is insistent that if we want to have a relationship with him, if we want to know him, if we want to enter his home in heaven, that we know and use his name. So welcome to Yada Yahowah. If you're listening to this program and you have interest in learning more, if you want to know what Yahweh actually revealed through the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms, the Torah, which means teaching, Nabi, which means to speak about the past or the present with the inspiration of God, the prophets or the Psalms, the Mizmor, most of which were written by David, who happens to be the Son of God and the Messiah, then you'll find them at yadayah.com. With that note, Kirk, I'd like to just jump right back into where we were last week.
Okay. Certainly.
We had already commented considerably on this, but it's a profoundly important statement. It's a long one. It was part of a long review of, this is now the 20th verse, of the 18th chapter of Devarim, corrupted to Deuteronomy. Devarim means words in Hebrew. This is the 20th statement, and it reads, "With absolute certainty, nevertheless, emphasizing this point, and to establish a contrast, notwithstanding this fact, the person who proclaims a message on behalf of a deity, Nabi, a prophet." Now, you have to be a little careful here, because Yahweh uses terms like Nabi as favorable and unfavorable. Cohen, the priest, it can be an exceedingly favorable term and a very unfavorable term. Elohim, the Hebrew word for God and gods, is used at times by Yahweh to condemn false gods and at times to speak of his title as God. And Nabi, there were about 40 Hebrews, all Israelites who were Nabi, who were inspired and authorized to speak for God. This particular statement is telling you how you can identify whether or not the source of a book, a message, is from Yahweh or made up by men who claim to be speaking for God. And one of the very first things, and that's why we talked about the name being Yada Yahowah, if you don't find Yahweh's name prolifically punctuating his pronouncements, you can be assured that that prophet is not speaking for God, but is in fact speaking for him or herself. So God made a very emphatic statement here as to who is a prophet speaking for him and who is claiming to be a prophet but is not speaking for him. Like, for example, it is projected on Muhammad that he was a prophet. Muhammad, however, never claimed to be a prophet. The Quran specifically says that Muhammad wasn't a prophet, and by any rational standards, that is in fact true. Muhammad never issued a single prophecy that he got right. The founder of the Christian religion, Paul, only offered one prophecy, and on that one, which was about the timing of what he called the rapture, and a very bogus term, there's actually a harvest of a gleaning of souls in conjunction with Towrah, but it is not a rapture, and Paul claimed it was going to happen during his lifetime, and it is still in our future, not very far in our future, but it is still in our future. So, with absolute certainty, there's no exceptions, in other words, the person who proclaims a message on behalf of a deity, Nabi. Now, this is a false prophet that he's talking about here, who deliberately oversteps their bounds, and it speaks arrogantly and presumptuously, defiantly. Examples of this would be Paul, the founder of Christianity. You read his letters. He is presumptuous. He is overstepping his bounds. That's so kind. He made it all up. Every word that he wrote was a lie. Christianity is based on Paul's letters and Paul's conscripting of Mark, Luke, and Matthew to echo his sentiments, and every one of them were blowing smoke. Not a word of it's true. Another example would be Akiba, who had thousands, tens of thousands of disciples, and claimed that he was the father of Judaism, and he was actually among the most disastrous Jews who ever lived. I mean, if you were to establish a criterion for judging who should Jews venerate and who should they condemn, Akiba should be at very most in the bottom of the top 5 of the most condemnable Jews who ever lived. There was a Knesset member, former minister of finance from the Likud party, which is the party that bribes the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, to vote them into power in the parliamentary system. And he called the current finance minister, who doesn't think it's appropriate to bleed Israel to death by continuing to fund the Haredim. Because the Haredim want to be paid a stipend to do nothing but be religious. And he just says, "Look, this is a joke. We can't bleed the state dry, paying these people to be religious. They want to be religious, let them do it. But that's their choice, and on their nickel, we ought not be rewarding their idleness." And for that, the finance minister, the former finance minister from the Likud party, that's Benjamin Netanyahu's political party, his personal fiefdom, if you will, called current finance minister among the worst of the anti-Semites who's ever lived.
Beg your pardon?
Yeah. And then he had a bunch of rhetoric after it. I actually wrote about it in the current chapter I'm writing today. One of the things that I wanted to be clear about, I said, okay, so what he's doing, because I want to say, here's the anti-Semite, Hall of Fame. There's some really interesting characters on that Hall of Fame. The likes of Nebuchadnezzar would be the Assyrian king that dragged the northern kingdom into slavery, and the king of Babylon that dragged Yahweh into to slavery, and it just goes on and on with Tiberius and Claudius and Nero and Vespasian and Titus and Hadrian. Among the Romans, of course, Paul is probably the greatest, most influential anti-Semite of all time. And you go all the way through Muhammad and Hitler. He would have the finance minister for not wanting to continue to pay the Haredim to be parasites. He would have him listed as among the worst anti-Semites of all time. That's how lost, irrational Israeli politics is. It is stunning, and this statement reminds us of that with absolute certainty. Mm-hmm. A person who proclaims a message on behalf of a deity, who desperately oversteps their bounds and speaks arrogantly and presumptuously, defiantly concocting a rebellious scheme. Asher Zed, who has an inflated sense of self-worth, insolently demonstrating self-reliance while being insubordinate, who conceitedly pretends to know, who insults others and is disrespectful, displaying pride in the pursuit of personal recognition. Well, that's got Likud written all over it, doesn't it? And claim, while despising rivals who intentionally rebel, is a pretty good definition of Asher Zed. For the express purpose of conveying words, under my reputation and designation, Ba'Shem Ani, which I have not expressly appointed, taught, authorized, nor distracted, to convey, or who speaks in the name of other or additional gods, then that prophet is actually deadly. That's Tabarim 18:20. I was translating Numbers 20 just before the program, and the Jews, the children of Israel, were having a temper tantrum. They were attacking Moshe, coming against Aaron as well, and there's, why did you bring us out here to die? We should have died along with those that Yahweh had killed. We'd be better off. And you say, wait a cotton-picking minute. You want to blame God for killing those who were religious and making the golden calf. And you want to taunt the source of life and say you would be better off if you were among them, those that God rejected for being religious. You didn't learn anything from that. You didn't learn that you were in Mitzrayim, which means religious and political oppression, and that God saved you from being oppressed and subjugated and enslaved by religious and political despots, and went in to save you from that, and that a significant group of you, while God was giving Moshe the Torah, decided to be religious, to go right back to the same damn religion that was oppressing you. and you make this golden calf in the image of a sun god.
Mm-hmm. Pharaoh's calf.
And God says, listen, I didn't save you for this. This is what I saved you from. So if this is what you want to go back to, you might as well die with the rest of the Egyptians. And so now, because they're thirsty, they're saying, we'd been better off if we'd been cast in with the lot of those God killed. This is kind of the attitude that Jews have towards Yahweh today. They say, maybe we shouldn't be the chosen people. They put God on trial in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. They're unwilling to accept responsibility for what they themselves have done. It's the problem of the whole world. And by the way, yes, we are picking on Jews. Why? Because God picks on Jews. Why? Because even though Jews are no worse or no better than Goyim, they have every reason to be better. God saved them. He didn't save Goyim. God formed the covenant with them. God revealed himself to them in their language through their prophets, and often in their home. They have no excuse. They ought to know better. And because God still loves them, he chastises them continually. And so if you don't like the idea, if you feel like, well, you're being anti-Semitic to criticize Judaism and to condemn Jewish behavior, read the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms. In fact, that may be the number one overriding theme throughout the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, is that God hates the Jewish religion and what the Jewish religion has done to his people. I interrupted you, Kirk. You were going to say something?
No, I just, the entire theme throughout the Torah and all the prophets is exactly that. What is this attraction to religion versus being free? And then with Yahweh, with a relationship instead of that. It just is, it's amazing.
Well, this is how bad it is. So at the Waters of Meribah, the Jews are grumbling. They said, we ought to be cast in with the others. So they wanted to be cast in with the religious as opposed to have a relationship with God. So what is Judaism today? Judaism today claims that its scripture, its religious text, was given to them and to their elders at the same moment in time that Moshe was up there on the mountain. And so the very basis of their religion is coterminous with the time God came down and wiped out that entire group of Jews for being religious. They claim that is the birth of their religion. So they received their oral Torah.
Yeah.
Youch. I mean, think it through, folks. To claim that being critical of Judaism is anti-Semitic, which is essentially what the Knesset member did. I think his name was Israel Katz, the Likud Knesset member. To state that being anti-Judaism is anti-Semitic is actually the opposite of what's true. It's Judaism that's the most anti-Semitic institution in the world.
Of course it is.
Why? For two reasons.
Because they scratch his name out.
What does the word Shem mean in Hebrew?
Name.
So if you're anti-name, whose name do you think that we're talking about here? Moby Dick? No, probably not.
No.
Yahweh's. Who are the people? What is the institution most responsible for writing Yahweh's name out of his own Torah testimony? Religious Jews.
Yes.
The most anti-Semitic people in the world are rabbis. That's a statement of fact, not an opinion. And the people that have done the most harm to Jews who also bear Yahweh's name. Yahud means beloved of Yah, related to Yah, are rabbis. Because without rabbis, there is no Islam, there is no Christianity.
Correct.
That those poisons that are so toxic to Jews and have been toxic to Jews for between 1,400 and 2,000 years, both of those religions exist because of the malfeasance of rabbis. Let's be clear. The reason that Christianity took root and grew is because rabbis were unaware of something that should have been forefront on their minds. When Yosha showed up, they should have said, there is the Passover lamb. You read the entire Torah and prophets, he had to come in year 4,000 Yah. It is obviously year 4,000 Yah. And here is the Passover lamb. Let's celebrate the Passover lamb. That is what Yosha is. And what did they do? No, they came up with every way in the world to deny Yosha's name, which means Yahweh saves. Every way in the world to say that rather than being a good thing, God doing something wonderful for his people, just as he had promised Abraham he would do exactly 40 Yobel earlier on exactly that same mountain when he said, I will supply the lamb. Rather than recognize that, they condemned it. Worse, when the morons of Christianity decided that they didn't like their head of their new religion being the Passover lamb because that's one and done, who's going to create a religion?
Yeah, you're going to bow down to now.
The sacrificial lamb. That's really pretty stupid. So they couldn't deal with reality. So what did they do? They robbed from David, two of his titles, two of his most important titles. Dode has more titles than, we can count. I started listening to him one time. You're going to fill a page. Yahweh really likes Dode. He gave him every title you can imagine. But two of those titles are Mashiach and Ben Elohim. He is the Son of God.
No.
According to God, God is emphatic. He is my son. I am his father. He says that of no one else. Dode is the Son of God. So the title that Yahweh gave to his son, the beloved, Dode, was confiscated by those Christians. And yet the rabbis, who said all they had to do is read Shamuel 7, read the second Mizmor, and say, wait a minute, read Yeshayahu 9, which is clearly about Dode. It even says it's about Dode, as do the others. And say, wait a minute, God says that Dode is the Son of God. He never says about this guy. Why would he claim that the Passover lamb is his son? But they didn't. And so they created this fertile ground for Christianity to rob Dode of the title God had given him, called replacement theology. And then they came up with this cockamamie story that the Passover lamb was the Messiah. That's how they came up with their Christ, which actually means, Christo means drugged in Greek, but let's not let truth stand in the way of a good lie.
No, a good lie,
He wasn't the Messiah, therefore he cannot be the Christ, therefore there can be no Christian, therefore there can be no Christianity. And the rabbis had the goods.
Yeah.
All they had to do is say, wait a minute, not only is the Son of God Dode, so is Dode. He is the Messiah. And Yahweh states, he's my Messiah. I anointed him. He was anointed 3 times. All they had to do was say that. And then Christianity came up with this idea that Jesus is returning, as if there's a reemergence.
A lamb return.
A resurrection of the Passover lamb. That the Passover lamb is really saving himself. No. So there's a second coming of Jesus. No, there's not. The one who is returning is clearly Dode. Yahweh says it over and over and over again. There are over 1,100 mentions of Dod throughout the prophets. You know how many there are of Yosha?
Zip.
So, all the rabbis had to do to stop the religion that tormented them for so long was just to tell the truth. But they didn't. And that's why we have Christianity today, and that's why the most anti-Semites in the world are Christians. Enter Islam. Muhammad had been kicked out of Mecca as a laughingstock. He had come up with this stupid story, Muslims believe to this day, that he had gotten on a wild ass and ridden from, well, he didn't actually ride from Mecca, he rode from Petra, but that's another story. It's, again, let's not let a few stones get in and the way of a good fight. So he went really. I guess the story is much more credible because Petra is closer to Jerusalem, and I guess there are
small wings
might well have been blind asses in Petra, but nonetheless, he's in bed. He's 53 years old. He's in bed with a 9-year-old girl. But forget the pedophilia for a moment. He has just announced that all of Allah's messengers speak on behalf of Satan. Yep, confessed.
By the way.
Yep, he had said that there are 4 gods that are part of Allah's little harem. So much for a monotheism. And so to get out of Dodge and to say na. He imagines in the middle of the night sleeping with a 9-year-old girl, assuming he was sleeping. She said he never moved. He claims that he flew on a winged ass from what was actually would have been Petra to Jerusalem, where he went to the temple. Of course, this was just shy of 700 CE, and the temple had been destroyed by the Romans 600 plus years previously. But again, we don't want the facts to get in the way of a good story. And so he went to the temple. He met with all the Jewish bigwigs. And the Dome of the Rock is built over the hoofy print of the flying ass, who leapt up to heaven. But guess what you find on the way to heaven? First of all, the only time he visited heaven, allegedly, was from Jerusalem. So I guess you can only get to heaven through Jerusalem, which is not the Islamic religion. But nonetheless, you know what you find on the way to heaven? What Muhammad went to, had to go through
went to heaven. Went to hell.
Went to hell, the Islamic hell, where he found it was
women
who were hanging by their breasts from meat hooks because they didn't fully appreciate the men who were abusing them.
Wonderful men, yeah.
Oh, he's such a wonderful story. Yeah, it's such a wonderful story. And so this is Islam. But so the reason that failure, that absolute immoral, pedophile, lying, demon-possessed by his own admission, nincompoop, has become the alleged prophet of the world's second largest religion because he was rehabilitated by rabbis. When he got to Yathrib, he had run out of material. He, his little trances, he couldn't come up with anything new. He bought, literally, according to the Quran, paid for the rabbis to read Talmud stories to him. And then he twisted and bastardized those Talmud stories to serve his agenda, and the rest of the Quran is filled with a bunch of bastardized Talmud stories. And by the way, the Quran is actually written in Hebrew. The word Quran itself happens to be Hebrew. Again, there you go.
And he was illiterate, so he did, on top of that.
So there you go. The fact is that if the rabbis had not sold Muhammad Talmud stories, there would be no Islam. That's not my opinion. It's simple fact. And because then the rabbis started mocking him, as they do, they're really good at that, mocking other people, Muhammad decided, well, I can solve that problem. He had all of the men beheaded, the children enslaved, and he raped the women. That's how Islam turned on Jews and became anti-Semitic, all because of the rabbis. So we need to really consider what God is saying here. Those guys are deadly. All right, we had commented considerably on this statement from Yahweh during our last program. I want to kind of pick up where we were the best I can, and it's to say that God is abundantly clear about who is and who is not working with him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a prophet, but I have a role in God's plan. God couldn't find a single Yehud who was willing to listen to him. You know, we've been doing this now, social media outreach, for a number of months. Have lots of Jews within the community we're reaching out to who have come to the sites. Not a single one yet has acknowledged that, based upon reading what Yahweh actually said and considering it, that they've decided to embrace Yahweh and his covenant.
Wow.
The only Jews that are part of the covenant now are those who had decided against Judaism and were independent thinkers, had become reasonable, rational searchers prior to coming upon this information. So really nothing has changed, and yet God is as clear as words allow about who he is and is not working with. And my role, as I say, is not at the level of a prophet, but God couldn't find any Jew to serve as a prophet, and hasn't been able to for 2,500 years.
Seven.
And so he actually told us through his prophets a score of times or more that he was going to reach out to a Gentile, and that he was going to communicate this witness through a Gentile. God tells you who he's going to talk through. He tells you who he is talking through and gives you all manner of information about them and how you should respond to that message, how you can verify that that message is from him. And in all of this, there isn't a single rabbinical affirmation anywhere to be found in the Torah or throughout the prophets. Here, I'm a goy. I'm have this job by default. There wasn't a single Jew willing to do it, and yet you will find mention of what I'm doing in the Torah, throughout the writings, throughout the Psalms, in the Mashal Proverbs, and many, many times in the prophets, throughout Yahshua in particular. There's one entire chapter of Yahshua devoted to it. And yet, there is not a single mention of the rabbis. Not one. There references to Jewish religious leaders, which Yahweh condemns. There isn't a single positive reference anywhere to a Jewish religious leader. Not a single reference to, oh yeah, you know, when I run out of prophets and I don't want to work with the Lowy Cohen, the Lowy priests anymore, I'm going to switch to rabbis. And boy, I'm going to communicate a different message through them. We're going to create this really nifty religion. We're going to call it Haredim. You're going to wear a weasel hat. You're going to run around in mourning clothes. Women, you're going to shave your heads. We're going to wear little curly cues. We'll play religious dress up. We'll never mention my name again. And we're going to have a religion that's got more rules than Carter has pills. It's just going to be great fun. No, there's nothing like that. The opposite is true. You have to be completely and totally ignorant of what Yahweh says in the Torah and prophets and Psalms to be a religious Jew. And again, we're not picking on Jews. Muslims and Christians are no better. No worse, no better. But Jews are without excuse. And so, since God didn't reveal the Torah to convert Goyim, He revealed it for the benefit of His family, His people, the Israelites, Yehudim. His focus is still on them. And so when He's condemning my people, when He's condemning Israel, He's condemning the religious influences of His people, which is principally today's Judaism. Further, while His role as the Passover lamb is well attested, Yahusha is not acknowledged by name anywhere in Yahweh's testimony. And there's a reason for that. And that's because the purpose of Yahusha was to fulfill prophecy, not to proclaim it. Also, Dod's name is proclaimed by the prophets more times than any other, because in addition to being the most prolific prophet, he is returning with Yahweh as the Messiah and King. When a person claims God authorization and inspiration, as Paul did, Akiba, Muhammad, Maimonides, and a plethora of rabbis have done, their testimony must be perfect, and yet it is seldom correct. There can be no latitude, no compromise, no accommodation, no justification. A false prophet cannot be exonerated by pointing out that some of the things that he or she wrote were true. A single errant stroke exposes them as an impostor. Their lack of respect for Yahweh, His covenant, His invitations, His terms, and His way are individually sufficient to denounce them all. Every legitimate prophet who spoke for Yahweh affirmed the Torah. The Torah that Yahweh revealed through Moshe, not that God-forsaken book called the Babylonian Talmud. They, as real prophets, share God's guidance and His teaching. They do not amend it. They do not challenge it. They do not replace it. They do not annul it. Their focus was always on Yisrael. Within their relationship, Yahweh speaks in first person and is frequently named, followed by Dod and Moshe. No one else matters, other than to identify the cast of characters interacting with and misleading Yisrael. Mm-hmm. It's really Yahweh, Dod, and Moshe. How many times do you find Yahweh's name in the Christian New Testament?
0.
Okay, well, the answer is the same as how many times do you find Yahweh's name in the Babylonian Talmud?
0. They're anti-Semitic.
Which means there is a 0 chance either of those books were inspired by Yahweh.
Correct.
And if it's not inspired by Yahweh, it's not inspired by God, because Yahweh alone is God. The unique and enlightening nature of Hebrew stems and conjunctions can often influence the way we convey verbs such as muth, which was the last word there, that prophet is deadly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the call stem, we should perceive false prophets as being genuinely deadly. We should recognize that their words are actually lifeless, that God's really being literal. There's no nuanced meaning here. It's straightforward. There is then good and bad news relative to the perfect conjugation, which was relative to or used regarding muth. On the positive side, the plagues inspired by such men will not endure because God has devised a cure. But as for the liars themselves, by writing mooth, such that the consequence is time-constrained, the false prophet's death will not be the end of their existence. It's a powerful thought. That means that there will be something beyond their death. And this means that Yahweh intends to dispatch such souls to Sheol, where they will remain incarcerated and separated forevermore. Since this is a life and death matter, Yahweh wants his people to be absolutely certain who was speaking for him and against him. So this is what he said next. And if you say, using your best judgment, ba labab ata, in your heart. Heart, keep in mind, heart does not mean the same thing in Hebrew, that it does in English. If we say heart in English, we think of feelings and being gushy and all that kind of stuff. The source of feelings in ancient Hebrew was the liver. The heart was the sense of judgment. When the term "take it to heart" is incorporated into your thinking, make it part of your perspective. Have it change your overall attitude as to how you approach something. Take it to heart. So that captures some of the old and original meaning. So if you say, using your best judgment, how can we actually and consistently know the statements which Yahweh himself has not spoken? So somebody wants to know, is the book of Enoch inspired by God? Well, God says, if you want to know, I'm going to give you the way to know. And the answer is no, by the way. Is any book in the Christian New Testament inspired by God? Well, there's a way to know. And the answer happens to be no. Is there any book written by rabbis comprising Judaism that was inspired by God? The answer is no. And God gave you the way to know. When a prophet speaks in the reputation and designation of Yahweh, and the matter discussed has not occurred or does not come to be, this is a message that Yahweh has not spoken to him. Whoopsie.
Pretty clear.
Such a prophet has stated it arrogantly, presumptuously, and independently of his own accord. You should not respect him for having conspired to incite such an alienating rebellion. So there were two things there. The matter discussed has not occurred, lo haya, has not happened, call imperfect. Literally, actually, from the beginning to the present time and beyond. Didn't occur. Or does not come to be, lo bo, does not happen, call imperfect, throughout time going forward. One of the things that many people miss about this statement and the terms that Yahweh used is that the first has not occurred, does not exist. What does that mean? It means two things. If someone is claiming to speak for God and they're saying things that aren't consistent with what God has already revealed, they're lying.
Mm-hmm.
Paul didn't actually get anything God said conveyed accurately, not a single word. So he's lying. The rabbis do the same thing. They convey their own thoughts, not God's message. And so part of it is your message has to be consistent with what has already been said. which eliminates, the Joseph Smiths from the world and Mormonism.
Oh, yeah, all of them.
Yeah, it eliminates all of it. But the second thing is that prophecy and speaking for God isn't just about predicting the future. It's getting the past right too, and that's really one of the things that kills those that would claim that the Torah was written and invented over over many centuries, culminating sometime in the 6th or 7th century BCE.
Yeah.
Beyond the fact that we have now
much older
text,
than that, yes.
Yeah, texts written in the alphabet of the Torah, the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, stating the exact events and terminology that were used in the Torah at the time of the Exodus, in the place where the Exodus says these things were said, and they date to 1400 BCE. That sort of ruins that argument. But part of the ruin of the argument is that the Torah speaks of the creation of the universe well before any prophet like Moshe should have known, could have known, and yet the depiction is accurate in the timing and events. The same thing is true with the flood. The timing and events are accurate. The same thing is true with the discussion of Babylon and what occurred there. The same is true with the discussion of what had transpired with Abraham and his journey, as well as with Joseph and his time in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. We have evidence that all of that occurred, and yet all of that occurred between centuries and millennia and billions of years in some cases before Moshe wrote it down. He could not have got any of it right, much less all of it right. Yeah, even if I didn't mention the flood took place exactly when and where Moshe described it. Started the same way.
Staggeringly.
Water. Yes. So he got all of his depictions of the past right. It's impossible without inspiration. But a prophet also gets the future right. And again, here there's a misunderstanding of what prophecy represents. God is not predicting the future. The prophet did not predict the future. Shamuel, as a prophet, is not predicting Dod's return. He's witnessing. Yeshaya is not predicting these things. God has taken him to the future to witness them. And the way that God does that is he transports your soul as light energy, and once you're released from your physical body and you become a spiritual being, light energy, to enter heaven and to witness time immemorial, both past and future, like on a photon of light, time simply is. You can witness the past in the present or the future in the past.
The whole parade,
Right. So God has witnessed the culmination of the choices that we make and has reported to us in the past what he has witnessed in the future. So he is reporting future history, not predicting anything. That's why he's always right. That's why he can say, if what the prophet has said doesn't materialize as he has stated it, then he's a false prophet. Because God never gets anything wrong, because he's not predicting anything. He's simply reporting what he's already saying. So that's how you know. And the Talmud doesn't measure up. Mishnah doesn't measure up. The Book of Enoch does not measure up. Christian New Testament, the Book of Mormon, the Quran. I have to laugh there. Quran didn't.
That's
the Christian New Testament. It's laughable.
Yeah.
So such a prophet has stated it arrogantly, presumptuously, independently, and of his own accord. Bazadon. You should not respect him for having conspired to create an alienating rebellion. lo gur minhu. You should not be inspired by him. You should not show any anxiety toward him or fear toward him. That's one of the real challenges, and I think it's very true in Israel. Throughout time, religion and politics have worked together to control people. And so by them working in unison, one empowers the other, and the other empowers the one. Sure. And so the religion says he's the authorized agent of God. He might even be God. And the one who is the religious are pointing to says they are the only authorized religion. And if you say, wait a minute, there's no evidence for any of this, then all evidence is to the contrary, collectively they'll cut off your head. And that discourages dissent to some degree.
Quite a bit, yeah.
So it takes a lot of courage to speak out against religion, considering the consequence. And there really has been no time where you could speak against Christianity and Islam and Judaism and not be slandered. So it takes a lot of courage to do it, and it takes a lot of intelligence to do it, a lot of compassion to do it, because you really have to reason your way through here. If you're going to make a case against Judaism, against Christianity, against Islam, against progressives, you have to be able to marshal evidence and reason in a way that is irrefutable. Even when you can do that, most people will turn you out and will use ad hominem arguments because they can't refute it.
Attack the speaker, yeah.
You better really be careful in this regard. Don't do it unless you're prepared to do it, properly equipped to do it. Before I spoke out against Islam and began to do many hundreds of radio shows against Islam, up to thousands of radio shows against Islam. I had written 2 books on Islam. I knew the Quran better than any imam. I had reordered it chronologically. I'd set it in the context of Muhammad's life. I had, using the Hadith, I knew it inside out. I knew it better than did any imam. And so I was in a position to expose and condemn Muhammad, relying solely on the Islamic text. Now, what's really interesting, of course, is the Islamic Hadith and Quran are, none of it's true. From the Mecca experience to Muhammad being a prophet to any of it, it's all made up, but it's all Muslims have. So if it's the basis of the religion, you're free to use it to point out that the religion has no validity. So the onus is really on us. We've been provided with the information we need to differentiate truth from lies. So God says that after using our best judgment, if we remain unaware of whether or not that person is speaking for God or not, we can use prophecy as a litmus test. If what someone claims was inspired and it has not occurred or does not occur, they're not speaking for Yahweh. The ability to consistently and accurately report in our past what will occur in our future is something that God alone can accomplish. The same is true with the distant past and in the time before man or writing. Now, give you an example. There are millions of people worldwide who are Mormons, and they believe Joseph Smith, and he was translating this dish which he lost, and then got another dish, and he lost that one too, and they believe that he was speaking for Gabriel and for God. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. One of them is that it's called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because they believe the Native Americans, that the population of the Americas were Hebrews. They were Israelis. They got on a big boat, sailed to the Americas, so that the Native Americans were Jewish. Well, funny thing, we have this thing called DNA now. It says it's not true. That the Native Americans came from Mongolia and from Russia and from China during the last ice age and walked across an ice bridge. That's how they came here. Oh, they say that they were riding around on horses and they had metal implements of war. Well, no, they didn't. Those things didn't exist here. And it goes on with just one mistake after another. And you can't have, of course, the Church of Jesus Christ because there's no mention anywhere in the Hebrew text of anything akin to a church. There's not even a mention of a church in the Greek text. And there is no Jesus in the Greek text, most certainly not a Jesus in the Hebrew text. And there is no Christ. So besides that, he got a lot right, I'm sure. Maybe he spelled his name right. I don't know. Sure. Certainly didn't know Yahweh's name, that's for sure.
No, he didn't know Yahweh's name.
No. So every nuance of the creation account conveyed through Moshe and Bereshit is a good example. It all transpired exactly the way he described it, long before we knew that this was possible. I mean, God said that He created the universe. We only learned that the universe was created. It had a beginning in the 1950s. That's a very long time prior to Moshe writing, and yet Moshe was right in the 1450s BCE. We know that it all started with light energy, and then it took a very long time for the first stars to materialize, literally materialize. Quarks had to cool to the point they could coalesce, and that energy could be coalesced into matter. Quark confinement. And so it began with light, just as Yahweh said. That was a fluid state, just as Yahweh said. There was great expansion, which Yahweh constantly says, I created it to expand, and the expansive nature of the universe is how we have learned through the redshift that the universe was created. Everything God says, the timing of each day when the earth was created, when the atmosphere on earth went from translucent to transparent, when plants were able to thrive, and how they created a more oxygen-rich environment and made possible for animal life, where that animal life emerged from the sea, to the fact that God says that He created each of these species, each after their kind, and we find that all 26 animal phylum that exist today all existed instantly at the same time that it's presented in the Torah. There was no evolution between them from one simple form to advanced forms. In the Cambrian explosion, they all came to exist at the same time. Everything God says happened in the order that He said it occurred. Now, you can't get that right by chance. Even the 6 24-hour days, precisely accurate. We know that because if you divide the 14 billion years of time since quark confinement, which is time did not flow, there was no measure of time, not even possible to measure of time until there's matter. Where there's only energy, time exists, it does not flow. So from the cooling quark confinement where we can actually measure time, the universe is 14 billion years old. If you divide 14 billion by the cosmic background radiation that we can detect from the Big Bang, a term which, by the way, Moshe used,
that's true. You
find that time was diluted. It stretched to 10 to the 12th power. That's how much slower time moved at the Big Bang was somebody who was at the universal creation. You know, the faster you're moving, or in the presence of the greater mass that you're in the presence of, the more time slows. So we know that time, a clock at creation, moved hugely slower than a time here on Earth. And we know that differential because of the wavelength of the cosmic radiation background noise, which tells us that time was diluted by 10 to the 12th power. All you have to do is divide 14 billion years times 365 and a quarter days per year by 10 to the 12th power. The number you get is 6 24-hour days. If that doesn't get your attention,
if that doesn't get your attention, you're dead.
Then you're dead. You know, or the fact that Moshe wrote that the flood would begin with a deep upwelling of seawater, and that it would eliminate human life with a nasalma at the place where those people existed, which was up the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Black Sea. And we find at exactly that time, the Berkel impact crater created a tsunami of upwelling deep sea water all the way up through the Tigris and Euphrates valleys, all the way up to the Dead Sea, which at that moment turned from fresh water to salt water with an additional 500 feet of water added to it, with the water flowing out the Bosphorus Straits, creating the Bosphorus Straits for the first time. And that's what caused the flood. It's exactly as Moshe described it. Now, how much more do you have to have? And yet, there's proof after proof after proof in our past, as well as stunning proofs in our future. So, no prophecy, no prophet. Similarly, a single errant prediction or depiction destroys the individual's credibility. By this test, Yahweh's test, Paul, Akiba, Muhammad, Maimonides et al. Were not prophets. They did not speak for God. And as such, there's no credible basis for Christianity, for Judaism, or for Islam. So why are there any Christians? Why are there any Orthodox Jews? Why any Muslims? God told you, don't respect them. Can they not think? Surely they're not all ignorant. Are they just apathetic? Or do they have no backbone? Are they aware of the truth and afraid to say it for fear they might not be popular? They might be resent. In fact, the Likud might even call you an anti-Semite. Oh no. Yahweh wants his people to recognize and condemn false prophets because they are devastating. They're deadly. Their message must be obliterated for humanity to survive and thrive. The Christian incorporation of Paul's epistles into their New Testament has stolen the lives, the souls of billions. Mm-hmm. Our ignorance of Mein Kampf, where Hitler claims to be Providence's, who is his God's choice. Mein Kampf is the people's, the Volk's religion. But because of our ignorance of Mein Kampf, 50 million people died. Muhammad's Quranic poison has been especially lethal. It has eternally damned 3 billion souls, and soon Islam will lead to the deaths of billions more in the Magog War. In the first 100 years of Islam, Muslim barbarians wiped out a third of the Earth's population. And those were its golden years. The solution, my friends, is intolerance. false prophets must be identified, exposed, and condemned. It's the most reasonable and compassionate thing to do. Few things are more important than knowing who is speaking for God and who is not. Should we trust the scroll inscribed by Moshe, recording Yahweh's testimony, or the letters Paul dictated to unknown scribes? After all, the consequences are life and death, vindication or condemnation, adoption or estrangement, salvation or damnation. Or from a slightly different perspective, should we be accepting and resentful, or respectful, I should say, of Paul, Mohammed, Maimonides, Joseph Smith, Karl Marx, Adolf Hitler, or even Joe Biden, perhaps Vladimir Putin, to keep from offending the millions who have placed their faith in them? Recognizing what is at stake, Yahweh has provided us with a definite answer, both in style and substance. Yahweh's test is a relatively simple one. It contains 6 elements. That's a nice number, Kirk.
Yeah.
16, the number of man.
Number of man, yes.
Yeah, a carbon-based life form with an atomic number of 6 who was created on the 6th day. It is the person, this is codicil number 1, is the person a Nabi? Someone who claims to speak on behalf of God. This is what I would call a screening codicil. If a person admits that they are speaking for themselves, then they would be excluded from this analysis. Very few people do that try to
own credibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even Biden with his weapons of war, he's kept on, he must have said 10 times in the speech, in God's name, weapons of war. So if you want to bring up God and you're
be careful.
making nonsense, yeah, you better be careful, because then you are deadly from God's perspective. And if you're misleading people in a deadly way from God's perspective, remember, Muth was written in the perfect. Death will not be the end of your existence. Is the person Zid someone who oversteps their bounds, acting presumptuously, with an inflated sense of self-worth, demonstrating self-reliance while taking liberties, someone who arrogantly pretends to know, who insults others and is disrespectful, displaying pride in the pursuit of personal recognition and acclaim while demeaning competitors, someone who rebels against the legitimate authority and is prone to anger, someone who seethes with frustration and is furious, overbearing, rude, and conceited. Wow. This is a broader net, but it catches most every imposter. Look at the egos that are attached with these men, though. Again, I come to the Russian foreign minister had Jews worldwide in an uproar when he said, the fact that the president of Ukraine is a Jew does not mean that he isn't promoting and working with fascists, neo-Nazis. Yeah. And he said, Jews have been some of the greatest anti-Semites in history. And while he cited Hitler, and listen, there are the DNA evidence has been done from his descendants, suggests that he may well have been a Jew. The only person who was assigned by Hitler to find out came to the conclusion that he was Jewish, and Hitler's response, because the person, he actually wrote a book after Hitler's death saying, I did my investigation, I came to the conclusion he was Jewish. When he reported this to Hitler, Hitler destroyed It's the only Austrian town that he went in. He leveled it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there is some evidence that it could well have been true. But if you really want to look at a Jewish person being a grotesque anti-Semite, well, what about Paul?
He's classic.
He created the most anti-Semitic religion in human history in terms of abusing Jews, and he was Jewish. If you want one today, how about Bernie Sanders? If you want one today, do you know that that Erdogan of Turkey is Jewish?
It doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, the kings, the royal line in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Jordan, they're Jewish. DNA has not been good to Muslims. So it is true that many Jews have been arrogant, overstepped their bounds, and have done great harm to the Jewish people. 3, does the person la debar ba'ani shem openly and publicly preach to others, communicating their message in the name or designation of God? As was the case with the first statement, the first of these 6, this is a screening test. If the person in question has an insignificantly small audience, if their preaching is done in private, if their influence is limited in time and place, then there'd be no reason to assess their credentials. My next door neighbor, maybe writing things that claiming prophetic insights, but if she keeps them in her diary, don't matter to nobody. If your words get promoted and amalgamated into a Talmud and taught in religious seminaries, then you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Is the person's message lo Yahweh inconsistent with what God has instructed, what he has taught and directed in his Torah? Does the message conflict with what God appointed and decreed? Does it vary from his prior testimony? And this is where they all bungle it. It's where the rabbis fail,
sure.
In addition to Paul and Muhammad. They can't even keep their own lies straight. They contradict themselves and, of course, are completely inconsistent with God. Yeah, this is the place where it's the easiest to prove that someone is not speaking for God. Inconsistencies, contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
Does the person debar Bashem Asher Elohim? Do they speak in the name of gods other than Yahweh? Well, replacing Yahweh's name with the Lord, with Jesus Christ, with Allah, Adonai, Hashem, or G-D, is very common among false prophets, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
In fact, you don't very often find someone's speaking lies and actually using Yahweh's name. They all speak in the name of their man-made God.
Made-up God, yes.
Yeah. Does a person, Haya, accurately convey what has happened in the past, and do their predictions of the future bow? They materialize? This is number 6. Do they come to exist as they have stated them? Well, this is a test that only a real prophet can pass. And in the last of them spoke 2,500 years ago. So Yahweh proved that he inspired the Torah, the Nabi, Wa Mizmor, by punctuating his words with prophetic revelations, all of which have long since come true, or they're materializing before our very eyes. As we speak,
no kidding.
Tonight in the late spring of 2022, we are just 11 years away from the end. So we are now seeing a very fast acceleration of what God predicted would occur before his return. And, Kirk, you and I have talked about this, that if you go back 4 years ago, it was literally impossible to envision how all of the things that God said that were going to happen would materialize, that the world could fall apart to the degree that was necessary in the time that was left. And then came the world's overreaction to COVID and its isolation and the destruction of economies and people's character. And then came the destruction of economies and currencies. Then came this myth of global warming being man-made, and that we have to change everything to fight fight humanity on behalf of the weather. The Great Reset, which is imminent, where the currency fails and we start over again, but with all sorts of new restrictions, with an electronic currency that allows complete control, with so many things. This war in Russia, where the United States
supply everything,
gave Russia no choice but to invade. We played the Cuban Missile Crisis, but this time as dunderheads, and we're playing chicken, trying to create pain and death for Russia. And there is the possibility that Putin is also a psychopath. There is the possibility that Putin has terminal cancer. There is that possibility. And if with the $50, $60, $70 billion worth of advanced weaponry that we have given to the Ukraine, don't think it's charitable using Ukraine as a proxy to go fight a war with Russia, because that's what we said we were going to do back in 2013, back in the time that two of the two single most respected Republican senators went to Ukraine and made that pronouncement, that we were going to fight a proxy war through them against Russia. This has been brewing for a long time. And yet we're doing this with a man who could well be a psychopath on behalf of the American president, who is a psychopath, and creating a scenario of which there is no way out with a man who could be dying of terminal cancer. What do you think he's going to do?
The worst.
It's the worst. We have pushed the world to the precipice of nuclear war, and there is likely no scenario that can avoid it. All the while he's screaming at keeping other psychopaths, little children, from having weapons of war. The world at the precipice of nuclear annihilation. Now it's easy to see how it is all going to devolve over the next 11 years. So by reviewing this prophecy, we have learned a great deal about the nature and purpose of God. Not only is there but one God, one covenant, one Torah, and one way to his home, Yahweh has provided the guidance we need to know him, to understand what he is offering, and also to appreciate what he is expecting in return. He has affirmed the means to prove his existence and to validate his promises. The Israelites no doubt missed it, but when Moshe asked God to choose a man to lead them after him, his answer was actually prophetic. Then Moshe spoke for Yahweh to convey, Yahweh, the God of the spirits, for every herald and messenger, has chosen to continually summon and support for the purpose of being accountable, an individual, positioned as a witness on behalf of the eternal and restoring testimony to the community, who, for the benefit of the relationship, will be brought out to disseminate the information publicly before them. Then, to reveal the correct path to the relationship, he will arrive to pursue them, such that they will not be without a witness on behalf of the eternal and restoring testimony of Yahweh, akin to a flock of sheep who were without a shepherd to guide them. And so Yahweh said to Moshe, of your own free will, you should want to select and obtain for yourself Yosha ben Nun. Yahweh liberates and saves the children who continue to grow and are empowered and enriched. He is an individual who, to lead along the proper path to receive the benefits of the relationship, has the Spirit within him. Be supported and upheld by placing your hands upon him. This is Bamidbar in the wilderness, Numbers 27. It concludes in 18. I think it's 16, 17, and 18. 15, 16, 17, 18, perhaps. Numbers really are mostly irrelevant. The reason that we state them is
looking up.
Yeah, you can use tools to go find that statement, and perhaps an interlinear and then a Hebrew-English dictionary, a number of them, and you can verify that the translations we're sharing with you are accurate. Verify the word. Make certain that what we're sharing is true, because if it's true, boy, there's been a whole lot of people lying to you. And it is. Kirk, you're one of those that over 10 years ago began to... 15, yeah. And so much of what you found is that initially you'd read a paragraph or two and say, well, boy, that there's at least half of what he said there I've always known to be true. I've never had anybody actually state it that succinctly, but I knew that was true.
Mm-hmm.
And the other half seems right. I wonder if there's a way to verify it.
Yeah.
And indeed there is. So that's the reason why we state these numbers. Numbers, and here we are in the book of Numbers. Midbar.
Midbar, yeah.
Ba means in, and midbar is an interesting word in Hebrew, and that it's a compound of two words. My, and my means to question, to ponder, to consider, and debar is the word.
Yeah.
So in the questioning of the word is the real meaning of that term. So here we are, Kirk. We're at the end of our program tonight. We are still recording. We're no longer broadcasting, but let's just think a moment here, and we'll come back to this next week. But prophets, of whom Moshe is the greatest, speak for Yahweh. They communicate God's words in his name and say nothing for any other. 5 reiterations of Yahweh's name, inclusive of its incorporation into Yosha, distinguish his testimony from the numbskulls who created the New Testament, Talmud, Quran, Mishnah, and Zohar, where Yahweh's name never appears. I mean, in this one pronouncement, we had 5 iterations of Yahweh's name. And throughout the Torah, Nabi, Mizmor, Yahweh addresses his people in first person, speaking directly through the Nabi, the prophet, to Israel. This further differentiates Yahweh's eternal and restoring testimony from the rubbish produced by the religious. As we approach Yahweh's opening statement here, we are tasked with the challenge of properly translating the following four words: Basar, Pakad, Ida, and Yatsa. And each of these can be rendered in multiple different ways. So perhaps that's the place to stop, because it gives somebody that wants to study this prior to our next program the opportunity to do so. We are reading from Bamidbar, 27, 15, 16, 17, 18.
Just completed 18.
Is the statement. This particular statement is, I was going to say, I was going to tell you to go to Yada Yahowah and look it up, but while the 7th volume of Yada Yahowah is completed, there are things keeping it from being put up there on the shelf with all of the other 20-some volumes of Yada Yahowah, and that is that the final edit pass on 2 or 3 chapters is still ongoing, and our beloved webmaster, who has responsible for getting the new material up promptly, can't do it until we do the final edit, but also he happens to be on vacation. So what we can probably do, though, is I can send it to Dee, and she can post it, I believe, on the social media accounts, so that if you go to the community, you will find at the Yada Yahowah site, you'll find, I think, the link to the social media that Dee and Leah are responsible for as the first link, and this will likely be presented there. So I'd encourage you to go there, because this is one of the fun things for me, where we're going to get into a passage that I think is prophetic. And I'm going to explain why I think it's prophetic, and my translation of it is quite different because of the way that most people render basar. Basar is one of those words that is typically rendered in the flesh, and yet that's not its primary meaning. Its primary meaning is to be a herald, to be a messenger. So we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about Pakad, and the fact that Pakad means to summon, to appoint, to be accountable. We'll talk about Ida, which is it's a family of words based upon Ed. And Ed is the Hebrew term that means testimony, it means witness, it means to restore, and it has a everlasting eternal component. So everlasting testimony, restoring witness is the root of Ida. We'll speak of Asher, which of course is my favorite word, and that it brought us to this point. And Asher is both a preposition, a noun, and also a verb, and it means to benefit from a relationship. Yatsa is the basis of the Exodus. It means to be withdrawn, but it can be translated to be brought out, to disseminate information. Panah means before or in the presence of, to appear. We have another appearance of Asher, and then will arrive to pursue them is bohem, and bo means to arrive, to come, to enter, to return, such that they will not be without a witness and restoring testimony, Ida, of Yahweh. and then we'll consider why is there a reference to sheep and a shepherd to guide them. Who is the Ra'ah according to Yahweh?
Mm-hmm.
And then why Yosha ben Nun? Why that name? Does Yosha really mean? Why was this also the name of the Passover lamb? And is it more of a name or is it a mission statement?
Mission statement, of course.
Yeah.
Let me share one quick thing on that note, and then I'll hold you up. I know you're right. You wrote, Yosha ben Nun, Yahweh liberates and saves the children who continue to grow and who are empowered and enriched. And of course, that's the whole reason of the covenant. And you go through the Moed Mikras, and so that's all perfect. I mean, it's just absolutely perfect. The word used earlier to describe non-prophets was Zid. Zid is drawn in a pictograph as a plow or something that cuts and tears up the very house, the very children of the house of the covenant.
Yeah.
So he chooses his words and he writes his words so you can't miss it.
Right.
I'll do the same with all the words next week as well.
Yosha, Yahweh saves ben Nun. The first letter in Nun,
lift up,
and the last letter of Nun is the sperm, the seed of life.
Yeah.
And it's held together. These two Nuns are held together with a Wah in the middle of it, and the Wah means to increase, to bring things together, to augment them, to continue to tell this story, and so that is in between these two seeds of life.
Yeah, you can't miss it if you're doing what you find here, and I'll just speak from my 15 years of reading and studying this stuff. You will find all the answers you want. You will find that it's true. You'll have to do some work to prove it to yourself, but it's there. This is wonderful.
Yeah, God is an amazing communicator because the original language of the Torah was a pictographic alphabet that you could read and understand the message, even if you were not particularly literate.
No, that's exactly right.
The first letter it's a ram's head, and think of all of the role of the ram. A male lamb is the sacrifice of Pesach. God refers to his people as a flock, just as he did here. Who's the leader of that flock? The strong ram. The strong ram leads and nurtures and protects the flock. The Aleph is drawn that way, and it happens to be the first letter of Ab, Father, and the first letter of El, God.
Yeah.
Bayeth is the second letter. It's the name of the letter means home. It was drawn in the shape of a home. It's the floor plan of a home. So the language is extraordinary in that way. We talked about prophecy. God's basis of prophecy is you have to be able to get everything in the past that you say about the past and everything you say about the future has to materialize exactly as it's stated to be a prophet. Well, the Hebrew language itself explains that because the Hebrew language has no past, present, or future tense. Statements are not locked in time. They're liberated in time. And it's just the language itself represents the light that is Yahweh, because just as light is free and liberated in time and not stuck in time, the same thing is true with Hebrew verbs. God is conveying a relationship. Every Hebrew verb comes with a stem. The stem establishes a relationship between the subject and the object of the verb. God wants us to choose to be with him. Many Hebrew terms are written volitionally, either in first, second, or third person volition. And since there is no past, present, or future tense, Yahweh came up with conjunctions for Hebrew so that we know if the action is completed or if it's ongoing. And there's such a difference between the two. It's just It's a wonderful experience. It's a treasure. It's a treat. I get to do this every day, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. I'm here with an incapacitated big toe and foot from an injury today, so today was a little longer day sitting here in the chair because, quite frankly, I couldn't move around very well, and so it worked out really well. But it's not a burden. So you might say, said so many times I've been doing this 6 and 7 days a week for 8 to 12 hours a day for 20 years now, and that's not a sacrifice. It's a legacy of great joy. It's fun to wake up in the morning and say, "Oh boy, I can't wait to get to my office and see what we're going to be inspired to say based upon what we read."
Yeah. It's cool.
Of all things, today I was translating the 20th chapter of Numbers in the wilderness, and who would have thought that story would be so rich in terms of insights? But it is, and it speaks to us today because it is so rich in insights. The whole thing is just
I'm going to have to sit up a while and read that one.
Yeah, it's certainly fun. God's a great communicator. He's entertaining. He's enlightening. He's liberating. He's fun to be around. Enlightening, enriching. It's all good, and there just is no bad. For those who are listening, if you happen to be Jewish and you're saying, boy, I have to give up a lot to walk away from religion and to accept this. No, you're not giving up anything. You give up nothing that has any value whatsoever, and you gain everything. Life is wonderful. I mean, the world's falling apart all around us, and we're saying, yeah, bring it on. Of course it is. We were told that was what's going to happen. And we've told what our future is.
So wonderful to be in that
position.
It
is. It's exciting. And, of course, to be able to live here in paradise is certainly a benefit to the whole world. I'm thankful for that as well. Well, Kirk, it's always fun. Thank you for being part of the program. My best to you and yours, pleasure. And look forward to being with you this time next week. May Yah bless one and all. Good night.
Good night.